Okay, our next agenda item is information on inclusive practices.
Our third and final presentation tonight on inclusive practices in Boulder. Kim Bain, our Director of Special Education, and I'm Karen Daly, Executive Director for Student Success. So you'll recognize these slides. We start with a group of lovely children that I got to work with many years ago. This is our inclusion journey. We took you back to 1975 when really the law began, and we come up to the present. Kim and I love this slide because it shows one of our current students at Centaurus. And this is a child that we would easily not have high expectations for, but we do have high expectations, and she reaches and exceeds our expectations frequently. Her mom was thrilled to show us this picture, and we asked her if we could use it, and she gave her permission for that. We wanted to review very quickly our 4 parameters. One of them we just talked about during the last presentation, and that is really protection of the school day for instruction and coursework. That is one of our parameters. That we do have the IEP, the Individual Education Program, that does drive how much inclusion a child should have during their day. And again, that IEP team includes the parents, and that really is the driver. School communities, we do believe our comprehensive high schools and even our smaller high schools and middle schools and elementary schools, that is their community. That is their primary place for inclusive activities. And finally, our last is that we are preparing our children for adulthood. Everything that we do, K through 12 and 18 to 21 transition services, is all about preparing ultimately for adulthood. And services are different there.
So we've taken you from past to present, and what we would like to do tonight is talk about future. And so our future, short term, is this school year, and what we have planned for professional development, for our teachers, but then also personal growth for our parents and education for our parent community. So one of the things, this journey extends beginning Friday. Friday we'll have a half day with our special education secondary teachers. On Monday we'll have a half day professional development with our elementary teachers. The focus will, this will be set up in more of a World Cafe style where teachers will rotate from topic to topic, but many of those topics will be around co-teaching, differentiating instruction, working with paraeducators, all the sort of stakeholders that we have within a school, and people who we can lean on to help us with this effort toward creating an inclusive culture. We are also, and I may have mentioned this at the last board meeting, we are also beginning a 3-day class, which is a college level class that will be instructed by Dr. Margaret Moore, and that is for our teachers in the intensive learning centers. So the teachers of our students who have the most significant needs will be learning new strategies about how to continue the specialized instruction that is necessary for some of our students, but have the focus be on the general ed curriculum and on our curriculum essentials document. So it's holding that high level of expectation and high level of access, but helping teachers understand how they can make modifications to the existing curriculum. We're going to be doing a lot of work with our paraeducators again this year because they do play an important role, and we want to move them from the Velcro para to someone who can really have meaningful work throughout the school community and the larger community as far as that goes when they're working with our students with disabilities. We're really excited. At the end of this week, we'll be announcing our 3 lab schools. We have had reviewed our applications from our schools, and we have made selections of our lab schools, and as soon as principals have an opportunity to share that with their staff, we'll be announcing that with the community and all of you.
There's one high school, one middle school, and one elementary school that will become the lab school site, so that we'll have exemplary models at each of our levels.
Okay. And that's very timely because on Monday, Dr. Rich Vila does join us for a week where he will begin his deep work within our schools. And so he'll hit the ground running. On Monday, he'll be meeting with our teachers, that half-day professional development that I was talking about. He'll be hosting one of the World Cafes, and so teachers will be able to come to him. He'll be meeting with some elementary principals the following day to talk about how they can help support the move toward a more inclusive culture in their building. And then Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, he'll actually be in the lab schools, beginning the work that he will continue throughout the rest of this school year.
So he'll be making regular visits to Boulder Valley School District. That is part of our use of our ARA stimulus funds, is to bring Dr. Richard Villa back in so that he can work with these lab sites and then also provide really professional development to our administrators.
And so when we talk about data and how, I know one of the questions from the last board meeting was, what is the data? So I've shared with you over the last 4 months articles that would speak to the data on how inclusive practices increase achievement and also employability. But we will start our own data collection now, and hopefully we'll have some great, I am 100% confident we will have great results to show you this time next year.
And the final part is our parent involvement. We gave you the finalized SEAC brochure that was developed. SEAC met for the first time this year, and Kim's going to really kind of go into a little bit more detail about how SEAC will run with its subgroups that are already up and functioning and running.
Right, so we did meet with SEAC. We had about 24 community members participate. We want to invite you all to attend any of our meetings. Our meetings are open meetings, and the dates are in this handout, this flyer. But we have 3 subcommittees that we have formed this year, and that those subcommittees are working really deeply focused on transition services and how we can improve those, and also how we can educate our parents around all of the significant changes that are occurring with adult services. Because if you are a parent of a child or a young adult with a disability, adult services are becoming more and more limited. And so we want to make sure we're doing a good job of educating our parents on this next journey in their child's life. We're also working on these alternative activities to the dances, and so we have a subcommittee that we've now met 3 times. We meet again tomorrow, and we're making a lot of progress on how we can take the work that we're doing back into schools and have that work become a part of the culture of the individual schools, as opposed to having to have an event that all schools come to. And then we're also working with, we have an ADHD parent support group. We have that as a subcommittee, and that has been a very well attended and frequently requested subcommittee and activity throughout the years. So those are the big focuses for us this year as far as SEAC goes, but we do welcome you to come and attend any of our meetings. So
That's it.
probably what we have to share with you
Open for
tonight.
questions.
So, questions or comments? Jenny?
You may have said this, so I forget. I apologize if I'm making you repeat. But could you explain how you chose Dr. Villa, right?
Right.
Villa.
Richard
Thank you.
Villa.
Dr. Villa.
Dr. Villa. Dr. Villa is one of the leading experts in the area of creating inclusive education. And so he, through tons of research and a lot of following his work and seeing the results of the work that he has done in schools. If you wanted to learn a little bit more, I'd be glad to provide you with more information about the work he's done with the state of New Mexico and the data where they have gone from being a state where very little inclusion was in practice at all, and the growth scores and the growth data that they have from the work that he has helped implement. He has helped at a state level, but then also at a district level. And it's not just New Mexico, it's the state of California. He has worked throughout the United States, but also internationally.
Other questions, comments? Tom?
Yes. So, tell me a little bit more about the monitoring. Are there more details about the monitoring of how you're progressing that you can share?
As far as how we will measure the
Yes.
success, so what we're looking at, we do have some really good baseline data right now, but I'm not quite ready to share that because I would like for us to fully implement this for a year. In schools where we know they were ahead of the curve with a culture that was more inclusive in their building, we have already seen significant growth data from this past school year CSEP scores. So what we will be looking at is who are the students who we are including more this year than we have in the past, and what is their growth data.
Okay.
So that's the parameters that we'll be using.
Okay, good.
Okay.
One other question, since the IEP is such a centerpiece to this, what are our checks and balances in place that we oversee that those IEPs are per what we really can do, and so that all the parents and the educational team are on the same track?
So can you ask that question in a different way? I'm not quite sure I understand, because are you talking about how are we checking the IEPs for compliance
No,
issues?
no.
Okay.
Not talking about compliance issues, that's another issue. I'm talking about how that we monitor those and check those such that things don't get in the IEP that as a school district we can't do. We don't have the facilities or the time or the budget or whatever.
So we're working very closely with our teachers. This is a shift in the way veteran teachers have written IEPs historically. We're working with teachers so that they understand the academic needs, the social needs of a student, and then what is educationally relevant and what may not be the responsibility of the school district. So we are trying to really shift the training that we're doing. On Friday, that'll be one of the breakout sessions that we'll have, and then we'll repeat that session on Monday for our elementary teachers. But how we look at planning what it is that a specific student needs that is relevant to their educational needs, but not necessarily the ideal, perhaps,
Right.
that has historically been in place.
Right. Because we have limited resources,
Right.
and we need to use those most effectively and efficiently for all of our children with special needs, such that if we are too much on one side, then somebody else is going to be missing a little bit. So I would just, I'm interested to see how that comes about and how we actually do those checks and balances, from an oversight situation.
And our funding, the ARA funding, will be over at the end of this school year. So the TOSAs, the teachers on special assignment that we've hired, the 3 people, we won't have that funding. So that's why we're hitting it so hard right now with this training with the teachers. Teachers have to have the capacity to do this because we won't have the staff to be able to provide that kind of support.
Okay, so you'll be training them and then expecting them to be able to follow the guidelines that you set in place.
That's correct.
Okay.
Right, and I wanted, something that Deirdre and the group that spoke before us talked about was, this isn't just a high school. I mean, we have to look at the continuum of the services that we offer in Boulder Valley. We're actually starting with our preschool community, our preschool parents and our preschool teachers, to help them understand what the long-term outlook is, so that sometimes if you create a system at a very young age where perhaps more services than are actually required are provided, then you also over time perpetuate that expectation. And so trying to help our teachers understand, but also our parents understand what's the educational relevance, what are the educational needs, and what is the obligation of Boulder Valley.
Thank you.
So,
Any other questions or comments? Thank you.
thank you. Thank you.
Our next agenda item is the consent grouping action items. Tonight it consists of personnel items, approval of minutes of the August 19th, 2010 special meeting, the August 19th, a second special meeting we had on the 19th, the August 24th regular meeting, and acceptance of donation, Cold Creek Elementary, acceptance of donation, Whittier Elementary School, acceptance of donation, Transportation Department, and permission for employee to sell products to the district. Do I have a motion to accept or approve the consent grouping? Jenny? Second, Helene? Does anybody want to pull any of these items? Does anybody want to ask any questions or comment on any of these items? Okay, Sandy, you want to call the vote?
Belleville,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Myers,
Yes.
Roberge,
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Our next agenda item is a study item on KC Master Plan for lead credit.
Thank you. As you're aware, Casey Middle School was designed and constructed to achieve the U.S. Green Building Council's leadership in Energy and Environmental Design Gold certification standard. The building has accumulated enough points to earn the gold certification and is very close to obtaining the highest certification of platinum. To achieve the platinum rating, the design team is pursuing an additional credit in the Sustainable Sites Master Plan category. And to earn this credit, the school district must ensure that future development of the project site will maintain the same environmental considerations as the current design. So we're asking the board tonight to approve a non-binding resolution making a commitment that future development on the Casey site will not compromise the environmental ideals achieved in the current design. I'd like to introduce Dan Leblanc. Dan is with the firm YRG. YRG is a Boulder firm that served as our sustainability consultants, and he'll give a quick overview of the LEED process. Thank you. Dan.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me tonight. Casey Middle School's been one of our best projects. We've been really happy and grateful to be part of it. And just to give you some background, the school is, in terms of the LEED process, is almost complete with its LEED submission. We're weeks away from putting in our final documentation to go for a platinum rating. And as Don said, we're we're 1 point into the platinum, over the platinum threshold, which is great because Casey has always wanted to be, or at least the design team, the intention for the school is to be a regional model of sustainability, and it really is that and more. And a platinum rating for LEED would really attest to that. I know the design team members, I feel like they deserve it. I mean, I've done a lot of LEED projects, but these guys have worked really hard. And I know, the effort of the board has been greatly appreciated as well. This credit, the Site Master Plan credit, really has to do with interaction with the school board and the design team on a level of saying, if we were going to do anything else with this project, what would it look like? And the plan that you have in your study packet was developed actually early on as what Casey would look, or the actual plan for Casey before it was scaled back. So this is a familiar plan. It's nothing new to the design team. We proposed this because it was familiar, because it wasn't out of the ordinary. And in fact, Casey, the site is, as many of you know, is close to build out. There really isn't a whole lot of room for other buildings on the site. And in attempting this credit, it's the idea is to really, it's a sites credits, it's within the sites category, so that we're maintaining all of the sites credits that we've achieved in our lead application if we were to build out this space. And it actually has to only do with 4 credits that we've chosen. Site selection, which has to do with maintaining the habitat of the site, that it's not endangering endangered species, that there's no farmland there. Pretty basic requirements for that. The second credit is a maximize open space credit. The site is already doubling the requirement for that, so this small build out wouldn't affect that one bit. The third credit is a heat island non-roof credit, which basically means we don't want to have hot black surfaces anywhere on the site. Like if we can avoid having asphalt, I don't know if you've been over to the site, but there's quite a bit of concrete there, which keeps the local microclimate nice and cool for the kids to play on the playground, for cars to come up. It's quite a bit cooler there than it would be if that were a hot black asphalt. So this small build out that we're doing there actually wouldn't affect this credit either. The stormwater quality credit is the last one, and that one we would be adding more roof area, which would cause us to have a little bit more stormwater on the site, but the current system would adequately handle the extra stormwater. So all 4 of these credits would be maintained even if we were to do that build out. So the process with this credit is to have the board approve the resolution and say that if we were to do this, it's basically a recognition of awareness that we would want to maintain the lead credits if there ever was a build out on the site, and giving them a probable build out scenario. So that's just a little bit of background of the credit and why we're here today. So I'll stay to answer questions if you have any.
Okay. Any questions from board members? Go ahead, Jenny.
There is enough parking at Casey, isn't there? I sort of noticed that the resolution sort of precludes adding much more parking space, and so I was just concerned because in Broomfield it's sometimes an issue that there's not enough parking at the schools.
I believe we have adequate parking at Casey now.
Any other comments? I'm quite happy with this. I think certainly I'm committed to maintaining what we have worked so hard to achieve going into the future, and I think the site plan looks great. So, should we bring this back on consent next time? Okay, let's do that. Thank you very much. So, the last item is agenda setting, and sort of posed a question a little earlier in this about some of our information items, and that would be a good time to discuss those, or if there's any other things you might like to add to items under consideration, or any other comments about specific meetings that we have coming up, particularly those in the next 6 weeks. Jenny?
Well, this is not for the next 6 weeks, but I'd like to see something at some point after Christmas. We do have 3 or 4 tag pilot schools that we got a report on last spring, and I'd like to see some information about how that's going at some point, and I haven't noticed it.
Elaine, do you have a comment?
I have an RFI request, and I don't know, this may not be the appropriate time to get an answer on this, but I would like the board to get an update on what our ICAP implementation plan is for the district, knowing that it is now a requirement that every student have a college preparation plan. So I'd like that. And so since you called me out on information items, I guess I'd like to say 2 things. One is I believe the comments I made last time had to do with a number of information items. Like there's only so much information that you can take in after having worked all day sitting up here listening to 6 information items. So I think that was one of my questions, was the amount. But, you know, as far as the value of information items, I think one of the issues that I'm trying to raise is that we get a copy in our board packet of an information item, which includes a PowerPoint. And being the good doobies that we are, we read our board packets before we come to meetings. To then have a presentation that reads us, sometimes verbatim, the presentation that we've already read at home, and then have limited discussion is frustrating to me, because I think we're missing a level of richness of conversation that we're just not getting to. And I would like our information item discussion to really be, you know, what is the issue? What are the implications? What's the impact of this information? And not just, we're checking off a box, well, we told the community about this, and so now we can move on. So that's what I'm pushing back on, and, you know, if I'm being a pain, you can just call on me all the time. But that's why I'm kind of pushing this issue. If we're going to get the PowerPoint in our packet, then let's actually have a conversation about implications or impacts or the key questions that are raised. And I think some of that we talked about in our retreat. You know, what are the pros and cons? What is staff wrestling with? What is the role of the board relative to this information item? And I think that would help make it more meaningful than just sitting there, you know. Or start by asking if we had any questions about the PowerPoint before you go through it. I don't know. So that's just kind of the things that have been going through my head once you posed that question, that guiding question.
Your comments? Or? Well, you know, I kind of felt the same way as I was thinking about what was going on. I guess I was feeling that we probably do need to condense the presentations just a little bit. You know, again, I agree with Helene that most of that was kind of already familiar, and I would rather spend more time talking about or having some discussion as a board about these things. I mean, we put these on the agenda because you know, they're important to us. They have implications for our policy, for our goal setting, for our communities. And so I think, and I'm not sure how to do this, we've talked about this a little bit as being a little bit tighter with our time estimates, and you know, through our agenda setting, maybe we need to do a little bit better job of thinking through those, and how much, you know, is this something that we feel is kind of primarily a report, or is this something that we really think the board's going to want to discuss, and then do our time estimates when we set our agendas appropriately, and with maybe a little bit more thought, and that's sort of one way of balancing those you know, the balance between hearing a presentation and having time to actually discuss some of these things as a board. And you know, I'm not trying to criticize anybody. I mean, I thought the presentations today were fine, but I do have to admit I was starting to lose my attention as well, and so I'm just wondering how we sort of deal with that. And I guess I'm not sure I have the answer, but at least I feel like I have to ask the question, because I was noticing myself sort of drifting off.
So maybe we have to come up with, and maybe this is, I think at some point in time we're having a conversation about the agenda. Maybe there have to be some guiding questions about information items that the agenda committee asks itself every time an information item comes up, which would be, what is the overall purpose of this presentation? What are we looking to accomplish by doing it? Are there issues that the board needs to understand? Because sometimes I think we get information items and I sit there trying to guess, okay, what is the real reason why this is being discussed?
Right.
And, once you've been here for a while, you can figure out the real reason. But for a new board member, it's all the same, at the same level of importance or priority. And you don't know how to screen yet. But I'm thinking agenda setting could have some guiding questions, and it kind of becomes being a little more discriminating
Right.
about the purpose of information items, and therefore the purpose could drive the nature of the presentation, as opposed to the stock presentation, which is staff comes up, gives a PowerPoint, we ask questions,
Right.
and we move on.
Now, we tried this in on several of these things where when we were sitting in the agenda setting meeting, we tried to actually put those questions into the agenda item that, that we get sort of as an output from the agenda committee. And, maybe that's something we should try to just do as part of the description that we all sort of come up with on some of these agenda items. And one way or another, if some of you have input as to what question would you like to ask on some of these topics, we come up with this with this list of of potential items, and you can all look at that, and that's the short list. I mean, that's only a couple pages long. But as you look at those and you see things that say, well, gosh, this is as I look at this, here's the question that comes to mind. Here's what I'm curious about this particular thing. And then we can sort of, take that and refine that as we kind of go through the agenda setting process, and ultimately, and I know, Chris has said this a couple of times too, staff would sometimes like more guidance from us as to what we're looking for. It's not fair to them to sort of have, not give them the guidance and then come back after the fact and say, it wasn't quite what we wanted. Well, that's...
And I'm not picking on you, but I'm going to use something you did tonight as an example. So Jenny asked, she would like an agenda item with a report, an update on the tag pilots. I sit there and think to myself, why isn't that an RFI?
Right.
How do we discriminate as a board between, why are we using board agenda time for this specific topic, knowing that if we do that, it's trading off something else? I think we have to become better at determining who wants this information. Jenny wants the information. Do 6 other people want the information such that it should take time on a board agenda? And if they do, we should.
Right.
Or is an RFI, should the first step for any information be an RFI? And then we only put it on the agenda if after getting an RFI, we have continued questions.
Okay.
I mean, I'm fine with getting a report on tag. It just is an example of what I'm
not going to answer because I assume I'm
Yeah.
hoping you are.
yeah. It's just kind of what I'm saying, that I think
No,
we
but-
need to be filtering and monitoring our requests.
But an item doesn't go from this session here straight onto the agenda. It does go through agenda setting,
Right.
and that question is asked in there. Is this the best way for this to be processed? Yes, no, or so there is at least one check and balance in there.
But I think, part of the frustration that I feel sitting in the agenda committee is oftentimes I don't, and this was brought up earlier, I mean, to what extent should the agenda committee be making too many of these
Right,
decisions?
right.
And I don't feel comfortable with that part of it either.
I agree.
And so, you raise a really good point. Maybe, and I think part of this is sort of this metacognition around this whole process of what we talk about in this particular segment of our board meeting. But maybe when we do have something like that, when a board member does suggest, might be a good idea to ask, well, what questions do other board members have on this topic? And just spend a few minutes talking among ourselves about this and see, to engaging what is the interest. And, this sometimes happens in RFIs too, which is really, I think, kind of a nice process. And that is somebody asks a question and then somebody adds to it and says, well, I'd like to sort of add on to this, and you get a couple of those, and then you begin to realize that the specific item that was asked for is not the real issue. The real issue is something broader than that, something at a higher level of policy or whatever. And by getting sort of a group of related questions out on the table, we can then sort of translate that into something that's more of a board level discussion or a board level activity than just a specific item which, as you point out, could probably be best done by an RFI. And RFIs are good too, but they don't allow that discussion that we have. And I always think that sort of in my mind, when I think about should this be an RFI or should this be something at a board meeting, is this really just a request for information, or is this really a discussion that we as a board need to have? And even if it could be handled in an RFI, if there's that discussion component to it, we should consider putting it on a meeting agenda anyway. So, I don't know, help us out with this. This is the time to talk about this. We'll probably talk a few more minutes and then we'll adjourn, but any other thoughts about this?
Yeah, if you do end up if I make a request for a report on the tag pilots and the agenda committee decides that nobody really, that's really a personal thing to me, that it's not that essential that we take up board time. I'd actually like to disagree with that, but I'd also like to know that that's what happened to it, so that I could see that it's coming back as an RFI, and then
Okay.
I could think about how committed I'm actually fairly committed to that, because I think
No,
it
I
relates to
think-
student achievement.
And by the
but I'm
way,
doing my best, yeah.
maybe we can practice a little bit on this one. I kind of think I'd like to have that kind of a report too, but I'd like to sort of understand what is it, again, why are we asking for it, and what do we really want? So it's not just an open-ended report, but, are there some, is the question, for example, do we have any data to show the effectiveness? Or maybe it's just a status report that says, what stage are we in the implementation of these? What's the feedback? I don't know. It's those kind of questions. If we can get some of those out on the table, that might also help us decide whether we could do this in an RFI or whether it's really, and just to sort of round out the discussion, part of what we're talking about doing too is coming up with a much longer term plan. So it may very well be that this is something we should do a year from now if we sort of understand that the issue here is what's the data telling us about this. We may be able to take a look at this and say, well, that's a really good point. We'll put it on the agenda for next May because we won't have data before that. And that way we don't lose these things, but at least we can sort of, on the other hand, if it's just sort of where are we in the implementation, that might be a better RFI. So
what we're talking about is some criteria or filter here with what are we going to do with this information? Why do we need to know this, right?
Right.
In other words, some things come to us as a status in our monitoring function to say, okay, how are we progressing? Other things are things that come to us like so we can be aware of what's happening, like Proposition 101 and 1661, and we needed to be aware of what was going on and start thinking about that. So some of those maybe loose criteria is what we should be looking at and asking the question, what are we going to do with this information anyway? So.
Elaine?
So I'll throw out another idea. So here's my concern. So now we have a board member who's very interested in TAG. So we have had more presentations on TAG or discussions and about TAG since you've been elected than we had before that. And I could argue that that's a good thing because it's an awareness. But we don't this year have somebody who's really passionate about second language learners. So we're not getting requests for a lot of second language learner reports. Rather than having these things driven by the interest of a board member, taking up agenda time, I would go back to our goals and say that we have 3 goals. We have work that's being done across the district towards the achievement of those goals. The information items we get every year should be consistent reports on steps, programs, things that are happening towards the achievement of the goals. So every year we should hear about special ed, ESL, dropout rate, tag, whatever it is. But what I worry about is because we don't have that kind of structure where we know every year we're going to get these reports and we know enough to know what time of year is the best time to do it. A lot of what happens is what is driving information items and was driving the agenda becomes pet interests of individual board members. And I, I'm just saying that isn't good for any of us to be doing
I'm
that.
actually gonna agree with you.
Yeah.
I'm gonna sort of defend tag as more than just a.
Well, I understand that, Jenny, and believe me,
that's not the-
I know tag is really important, but you know what? It isn't the only important
No,
thing, and
no.
all I'm trying to do is make sure we cover
No, and
all
I
of
actually-
the important
I actually agree with you
things.
that there are a lot of important things we should be talking about, so I just had to say that about tag, but I actually do agree with you. There should be a whole cluster of things that we just routinely talk about. Tag should be one of those. ELL students should be, all those, all of our,
Right.
I just lost my sentence.
No, we're in violent agreement, you're right.
Yeah. And, in some of the policy governance things, they have this concept of monitoring reports. And they are specific reports that are done on a regular basis, have a very specific set of questions that they ask and generally a set of metrics that they're agreed to. And that's what essentially structures the board's work.
And I think it
we
would help
have-
staff.
We have actually moved towards something kind of like that with our quarterly reports on our goal achievement, and we try to customize those around the data set that is current and fresh at the time. But I think we have a more regular cycle on those goal attainment topics than we have, and I think we could do more of that. I think it's worth pointing out that the 4 last time and the 2 today, so the last 6 or 8 information items we've had were requested by the board. So we are in kind of a reactive mode when that happens. And each one of them had legitimate, valid reasons for why that happened. But like RFIs, when they come in writing, I think we're more likely to hit the target, because we do sometimes have this kind of, what's the question behind the question, or what did you hear, what did I hear? And we've gone back and forth, kind of, how do we get the right answer? And even with the effort that we put into it, sometimes it's too general or too long or too specific or too this or too that. So in writing, I think we'd come closer to our mark more often than not. But we definitely want to get it right. We want to meet your needs and answer the questions as you pitch them to us. And so I think writing would be a good way to do that.
Leslie?
I know my attention span probably 2 study items, and after that I sort of shut down. And I know when we met yesterday, you talked about sort of building this 2-year plan where we can have, our monitoring of the goals that you've already set up, and we know when we need to talk about budget things and so forth, and then, sort of come up with a loose guideline of no more than 2 study items per meeting, unless something comes up that's really important that we need to discuss. And, if we've got that long-term plan, then we have the skeleton where we know we can start maybe adding a little bit here and there that we don't know at this point that we need to discuss.
Okay. Ready to adjourn? Okay, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Jenny, seconded by Leslie. Any objections? Hearing none, we are adjourned at 8:53.